so before we get on to the second part, I want to show you guys a little bit what I did this weekend. Alright, so this is some GoPro footage of me diving. Just want to show you guys. I was looking for halibut, alright, it's a flatfish on the bottom of the ocean, but instead I found some other things, so let's take a look. Alright, so I'm about to dive to the bottom. And I don't know if you guys can see, but
There's like
there's a little fin there poking up from the sand.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I wonder what
Sand shark?
that is. Right. Let's see.
Oh.
It's actually pretty big.
Ooh.
That is
The sand shark, right?
angel shark.
Oh.
Yeah,
Because
some
of
people
the.
call it
It's
sand
type
shark.
of a sand shark.
Yeah. There's no very large shark. Right? So there you go. Right. Angel shark. I got some pictures later. Alright, let's take a look. So I put my
That's not
spirit gun
very
next to
fine.
it, and you guys can see
Wow.
it's pretty big. So look, the spirit gun is about like from here to here. So angel shark is right over there. Let's see. Other picture would be better. I didn't get the full picture on that one. Man, these pictures are not very good. But that one, at least showed it. That was cool. And then there's another video I want to show you real quick. I think this is the one. All right, I saw a really, really impressive fish. Look at that.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. That fish is so crazy. Okay, here's the thing, you guys. I was trolled, okay? I was trolled. I didn't see a single halibut on this dive. When I was down there, all of a sudden this other diver swims right behind me. I was like, oh snap, there's another guy over here. And he was carrying 3 halibut. I was like, where did you find them? I'm literally like 100 meters away from you the whole time. Yeah, he found them all and I didn't find a single one. But I did happen to find that fish. You guys wanna know what's so crazy about that fish? That fish, no, it wasn't dangerous. Okay, that fish
It's rare.
is rare. Yeah, that is the black sea bass. It is probably
Wow.
the
Wow.
rarest fish in SoCal because it's critically endangered.
Yeah.
And oh, you've heard of it? Yeah. Do you go
Because
fishing?
my dad goes fishing and he talks about it.
Oh, okay,
When he
yeah.
said black sea bass, I'm like, whoa, that
Yeah,
is so rare.
Right. I can't believe I found it. It wasn't big. It was only this big. It's like a juvenile thing. You know, they get like
They get huge.
Yeah, they
huge,
get
like
huge.
300 pounds. I don't even know. I just made that up,
Wow.
but they get huge. Okay, and I can't believe I saw one of those. Like I found one of these, but I didn't find a single halibut. Right? Yeah, this is like one of the rarest fish out there, and you can't catch it in America, right? The only place allowed to catch it is like Gulf of Mexico, right? You can go over there, and if you have a Mexican fishing license, then you can bring one back, right? But otherwise, you're not allowed to have one. So that's pretty crazy, right? Just on the coast of Palos Verdes, right in our backyard. But I did not see a single halibut. Oh man, hopefully I have better luck next time. Okay. Alright, so let's continue on with this. So plants, right? Our segue into plants. So plants, right? We know that plants do photosynthesis, right? Okay, photosynthesis produces oxygen. Well, how do they do that? They do that through this process, right? This is the photosynthesis equation. You don't have to memorize this, but we can walk through this, right? This is what all plants do. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. But you know, if you if you own a garden, you kind of know a little bit what plants need and what they produce, right? So they all need sunlight, right? You water your plants, and what do? They produce oxygen. You guys see that? And this. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, what's that? It's a type of sugar, right? It's called glucose. Right?
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
so glucose is right. It's a really important energy molecule that all organisms use, almost all organisms, right? So here we have the photosynthesis equation. They use water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, and they produce oxygen and glucose. Well, here's the thing. What are they doing? They're turning carbon dioxide into glucose, right? That's a really interesting procedure, right? They take up carbon dioxide and they turn it into glucose. Well, that's crazy because here's the thing. Carbon dioxide, to us, that is a useless molecule. We cannot do anything with carbon dioxide. In fact, we expel it as a waste product through our lungs, right? We try to get rid of it. But this is useful. We eat this. We eat this and get the energy out of it. So when you do a process that takes something useless and turns it into something useful, we call it fixation, right? In this case, carbon fixation, right? So if you guys look at this, the process of fixation is turning useless carbon into useful carbon, right? It's really interesting, that word fix, because, you know, we usually think of fixing as if you're trying to repair something that's broken. Well, you know what? That's exactly what's happening. We take the glucose and we break it down into carbon dioxide, into something useless. You break it down, right? Now it's not useful anymore. But then what do plants do? They pick up the pieces and they fix it. You fix the broken thing and turns it back into something useful, right? So fixation is not only talking about fixing broken objects, but we're also talking about fixing broken molecules, right? Things that are no longer useful and now they are useful after you do that. So plants, right? They fix carbon. And the amount that they fix is called primary production, okay? So the amount that they fix, you can translate it into many different ways. How much carbon dioxide was used up, how much glucose was produced, how much oxygen was produced. All those things are basically synonyms, and they all mean the same thing, right? So you can measure primary production in all those different ways. Right? The only thing is, when you want to measure how much glucose is produced, we usually don't talk about glucose. Glucose gets locked up in the plant's body, right? So if we want to talk about production of glucose, we usually talk about the production of the mass of the plant, right? So if you produce more plant matter, then that's considered more glucose, considered to be primary production, right? So more plant matter, okay, that's primary production. We can compare primary production across different ecosystems, but we have to do it smartly, all right? So I'm going to show you how to do it. The first thing we need to do is consider this amount, gross primary production. You guys know what gross means?
Total.
Total. Yeah, gross means the total amount of primary production that happens, right? Think of your paycheck, right? You have a gross pay, and then what happens to it?
You have a net pay tax.
And then you got all these taxes and stuff, and then at the end you get the net pay, right? See, the taxes is something that you subtract from the total, right? So we're also going to subtract something from the total. Basically, the plant is producing oxygen and glucose, right? But guess what? The plant is doing it because he wants to use some of it too, right? So the plant uses some of its own oxygen and some of its own glucose. Right? So if he uses some of it up, then you cannot count it towards the total, right? So the plant produces oxygen, produces glucose, but then he uses some in a reaction called respiration. Guess who else does respiration? We do, right? Animals. Animals do respiration. They also use the glucose and oxygen, right? So anyways, the plants use up some of the production, some of its own primary production. Okay, so imagine you produce this much, you use this much, so you take it away. So you're going to take the gross primary production and do what to the respiration? You're going to subtract it. Okay, when you take it away, then that's when you get the net, right? So in this case, yes, we also have a net. Net primary production is how much carbon is left. All right, now this is important. We should only talk about comparing net. We should not compare gross. Because think about this. You and your friend. You don't make as much as your friend, and your friend makes a lot more. But he has much more bad spending habits. At the end of the month, you have more money. Why is that? You don't even make as much as he does.
He wastes his money.
Yeah, he has a higher gross, but this part was higher for him as well. The subtracted part. So it's not useful to compare this. If you want to compare incomes, that's not useful, because if he has bad spending habits, then he's still going to have less money than you. What you should compare is bank accounts, right? Which is this. Net primary production. What is left at the end, right? That is the important part that we should compare, and that is what scientists use to compare different ecosystems, because the respiration rates could vary. All right. So if you use this, this is already taking both these into consideration. And now we're gonna compare how much plant matter is left in all these ecosystems, right? So let's compare them across, we're gonna compare them across land and sea, but before that, I just wanted to show you this slide that you guys can read at home. It's just alternative ways of visualizing primary production. Okay, so like amount of carbon that goes into the plant body, we mentioned that one, and the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, the amount of carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere. Right, those are all different ways to visualize what primary production means. Okay, so yeah, anyways, let's take the net primary production and compare them across land and sea, right? So sea is called marine, right? Or aquatic sometimes. Marine organisms, marine ecosystems. Land is actually called terrestrial, right? Terrestrial means earth, and if it's extraterrestrial, then it's not of this earth, right? Like alien. But terrestrial actually means earth, so when we talk about land ecosystems, it's terrestrial. What are we? We are terrestrial. We're not marine, right? We do not live in the ocean. We can go in the ocean, but we do not live there, right? We live here, so we're terrestrial organisms ourselves. Okay, what do you guys think? Terrestrial ecosystems versus marine ecosystems. Which one does more primary production?
Terrestrial.
Okay, why do you guys think terrestrial?
Because we reproduce a lot.
Yeah, but what does it have to do with primary production?
Plants. There's more plants.
But there's plants in the ocean too.
There's more plants on the
oxygen.
surface.
Of what? The ocean? Or land?
Of the planet.
The planet. That's both then.
Yep.
That's both. So you didn't answer the question. Marine ecosystem or terrestrial, which one does more primary production?
I think it's marine.
You think it's marine. Why do you think it's marine?
Because we're surrounded by a bunch of water.
Okay, so there's a lot of water. Look at this map right over here. The ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface, right? That's, that's a logical conclusion, right? I'm okay with that, right? It makes sense to think that marine has more primary production
Is there
than
more life
land.
on terrestrial?
There could be more life on terrestrial, but at the same time, the ocean's big, right? The only way to find out is by comparing them directly, looking at the numbers, right? So let's look at the numbers. Which ecosystem out of the terrestrial ecosystems, out of the marine ecosystems, they all have a bunch of different ecosystems. Which ecosystem produces the most? All right, number one. Open ocean. Okay, not surprising. Open ocean is number one, right? Open ocean does the most net primary production. Well, here's the thing though. The open ocean does a lot of primary production because it's huge, yeah. But look at that. Close second, tropical rainforest, right? How much tropical rainforest is there in the world? A lot or a little?
A lot.
Well, I mean, compared to the size of our cities,
Little.
but compared to the ocean, not that much,
Not
right?
that
Like,
much.
we go look at that map again, right? If we look at this map, how many tropical rainforests are there? There's 3. Right? One right here, the Amazon. Right over here, the Congo. It's only this big. And the last one over here in Indonesia, these islands. That's not that much. That's not that big. That's it. That's all we got. Those 3 tropical rainforests compared to the whole ocean, and they're almost equal. Right? So who's efficient here? Rainforest or ocean? The rainforest is efficient. In just that tiny little bit of area, it's able to almost match the whole ocean, right? So clearly, this is not a good comparison here. This is unfair, right? It's unfair to compare the whole ocean to those tiny little rainforests, right? The open ocean is definitely the highest because it's huge, right? It covers 70% of the whole surface, right? But let's give them a fair comparison, right? And what I mean by that is let's take size out of the equation. This much of ocean versus this much of rainforest. How about that, right? Put them on a level playing field. Let's standardize this, right? You can standardize or normalize it by taking the amount of primary production and divide it by the total surface area, all right? So if you were to do that, then you're gonna literally compare 1 square meter of ocean versus 1 square meter of rainforest. we get? We get this. Looks like on land, swamps and marshes, tropical rainforest, temperate forest, all pretty good producers. How about aquatic ecosystem? Number one is, oh wait, that's not open ocean. That's estuaries. That's where the river flows in. Open ocean? Oh snap. It is very, very inefficient. The only reason why the open ocean still produces the most is
It has the most.
because it's just gigantic, right? It's giant, but it is very inefficient, right? Whereas the land is small, but is very efficient. So what can we do to figure out who produces more? Take all these ecosystems and add them all up together. And at this point, looking at the lines, I don't know, it kind of looks like land is higher than the ocean. So if we were to actually do that, it comes out to be 54% of net primary production is on land, 46 is in the ocean. Right? These numbers vary. Okay. These are estimates. Our tools to measure this also get better over time. So take these numbers with a grain of salt. But just realize the important part is that terrestrial does more than marine. Slightly. Okay, just slightly more than half. Marine does slightly less than half. Because although smaller, terrestrial is just way more efficient. Right? Why is terrestrial so much more efficient? Right? Let's take a look at this map right here. Right? First of all, we have to know that in the ocean, the primary production is not supplied by trees. Right? It is supplied by tiny little guys. Phytoplankton. Right? Those things are probably no match for those trees, right? If we look at this map over here, this is a map of primary production on Earth. No, sorry, of the oceans. Okay, we omit the land. Okay, we black them out. But in the ocean, this is primary production of the ocean. And although it doesn't say, our metric for primary production is chlorophyll. You guys see how chlorophyll is a metric for primary production? Because where do you get chlorophyll from? Or who has chlorophyll? What organism has chlorophyll? Wait, do you guys know what chlorophyll is?
No.
Okay, good answer. Chlorophyll is a pigment that allows plants to absorb sunlight. Does that make sense? Okay, so if there's chlorophyll, then there are plants. If there's a lot of chlorophyll, then there are a lot of plants. Good. Okay, so this is the chlorophyll concentration. And what would you guys say about the majority of the ocean? A lot or a little? Why do you guys say a little? The color is purple. Look at purple. The lowest one. Right? The majority of the ocean does not have that much chlorophyll, therefore does not do that much primary production. So you guys see this map corroborates our previous chart that shows that graph that shows that the open ocean does not do that much primary production. Right? It's mostly purple. Most of the primary production occurs on the edge, right, near land. See, isn't it sad? The places where the ocean is doing a lot of primary production, it looks like it's like mooching off the land, right? It's gaining something from the land, whereas these things far away from the land is not, right? Looks like the land has all the primary production, the ocean does not, right? So why is that? Why does the ocean not have that much? Well, it all boils down to what plants need to survive, right? What are plants using up at the surface of the ocean? They are using up the oxygen, or no. They're producing the oxygen. They're using up the carbon dioxide. What else are they using up though? Besides carbon dioxide. What was the other one?
Oh.
No. But the general term is
The one thing that we don't use.
nutrients.
The nutrients.
Okay. Yeah, we don't use nutrients. That's true. Okay, the nutrients, right? Well, there's not that much nutrients at the surface. That's true in the whole ocean. There's not that many nutrients out there, right? The ocean is oligotrophic, right? Oligotrophic means lacking nutrients. Oligo means, lacking in general or reduced, not that much. Trophic has something to do with eating, energy flow, and in this case it means nutrients, right? So although the ocean is big, with lack of nutrients, you can't support that much plant life, and therefore primary production is not very high. Okay. So there you go. That is why the ocean does not have that much primary production. Lacking nutrients. It's oligotrophic, and it looks like where are all the nutrients? They are here because they come from the land through runoff. Okay, river runoff. Bringing the nutrients over. Okay. All right. So the ocean is super inefficient, right? We can see that corroborated by this graph, this chart map. Okay. Cool. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I mean, in the ocean, most of it is done by phytoplankton. Right? Phytoplankton are tiny, no match for those trees, right? Those trees, huge, very efficient. Right? Remember, primary production has something to do with plant matter, and being huge and heavy, those trees are really putting a lot of glucose in their bodies, right? They're taking a lot of carbon dioxide out and putting it in their bodies in the form of glucose. Hey, where's these guys? Not so much. Okay. All right, good. So we just mentioned one. This phytoplankton is a marine primary producer. So it is now perfect time to segue into our discussion of marine primary producers, right? Let's talk on marine primary producers. Okay. So a primary producer is an organism that does photosynthesis, like a plant, right? A tree. That is a primary producer. Well, we don't have trees in the ocean. Well, we have a couple that live on the edge of the ocean, like mangrove trees. But for the most part, we don't. For the most part, we have organisms such as these. Phytoplankton, which we mentioned earlier, and of course, we cannot ignore seaweed, right? Seaweed is a really important marine primary producer, right? Scientists like to call it macroalgae, right? Seaweed, that's like our layman term, the normal people saying seaweed, but the scientists say macro, big algae. Algae means aquatic plant, right? That's what algae means. Okay, well, turns out there's a third guy. There's a third player here, and he's not a plant. It is not a, well, these guys are a group of organisms called protists, right? It's not a protist. It is a type of bacteria known as cyanobacteria, right? You guys probably have never heard this before, but it turns out there's a type of bacteria that does photosynthesis, right? Bacteria live all over the place. Not all of them make you sick. Some of them are used to make your food ingredients. Some of them are in your body helping you digest, and other ones are out there doing photosynthesis, right? So cyanobacteria here are a type of bacteria that does photosynthesis, right? So we're going to talk about each one of these. We'll talk about the cyanobacteria first, and then we'll get into the macroalgae, and hopefully we can finish the macroalgae today, but if not, we can continue on next time. Okay, so cyanobacteria. Let's talk about that first, that word. First of all, it's a type of bacteria, right? That's obvious. But what kind of bacteria? It's a cyanobacteria. So what does cyan mean? You guys know what cyan means? I'm sure you guys know what cyan means. Anybody know? Look at that map back there of California. You see that? Does that look cyan to you guys? No?
I don't know. What do you look?
Okay. I'll just tell you.
Looks sounds like science.
That is funny. Okay. Cyan is a color, alright? And that color is blue-green, alright? You take blue, you take green, you mix them, you get cyan, right? Cyan is actually one of the primary colors of light. And if you guys know about your printers, your inkjet printers, you have four colors. Blue or black, yellow, magenta, and cyan. Right, exactly. See, so you take cyan and mix it with magenta, you get blue. You take cyan and mix it with yellow, you get green. So with those three colors plus black, you can make any color out there. And cyan, we like to use that to describe anything that's like bluish green, right? I say in general blue, right? Because now that I think of it, there's another term. Cyanosis. You guys know that? Cyanosis? It's a condition that Anybody gets if they are being strangled or they're experiencing oxygen depletion? Yeah, they turn bluish or purple, right? Yeah, so their face, right? So cyan means blue, okay? How do you become blue or green? They have pigments inside of them, right? So the pigments inside of them, well, if you want to be green, you have chlorophyll. If you want to be blue, we need to use phycocyanin, right? Phycocyanin is blue. Look, it has cyan in it, right? I color-coded it for you guys, so you guys can see what color they are. On some occasions, they might have another pigment. Phycoerythrin, right? What color do you think that one is?
Red.
Red, yeah. You can also look at the word, okay? Cyan means blue, but eryth. You guys heard of an erythrocyte before? Yeah? No? It's okay. Erythrocyte, you guys all have them by the way, is a red blood cell. So red, right? So there you go. Alright, phycoerythrin makes you red. Not all of them have it, but they have small concentrations. Some of them have small concentrations. They mostly have the first two. Makes them blue and green at the same time, right? So make sure we are keeping track of these pigments, right? Spelling is not that important, but remember, make sure you spell it in a way that if you read it off, it sounds right. Okay, chlorophyll, phycocyanin, phycoerythrin, and cyanobacteria. Okay, so cyanobacteria, right? Do you guys think cyanobacteria came first, or do you think trees and other stuff came first?
Bacteria.
Probably these, right? The general rule of thumb in evolution is the simpler things came first, complex things came later, because complex things are harder to make and it takes longer to make something that's hard, right? That's just a general rule of thumb. So bacteria probably came first and cyanobacteria were probably the first photosynthesizers, right? In the ocean, the most abundant cyanobacteria is Prochlorococcus, right? Okay, so prochloro, I'm guessing that means before green plants, before chlorophyll maybe? I don't know. I think they have a little bit of chlorophyll inside. Coccus means grape-shaped, spherical, right? Kind of makes sense. Right? Prochlorococcus marinus. That is the scientific name of the most common cyanobacteria out there. Prochlorococcus is the genus, right? I'm going to tell you guys later what a genus is, right? But that is just one way to call this organism right here. Prochlorococcus, a type of cyanobacteria. Okay? All right, so anyways, like I said, these guys, right? This part of the ocean is nutrient limited, oligotrophic. But it turns out cyanobacteria thrive in these areas. Why do they thrive there? Well, here's the thing. If you want to live somewhere that has not that many nutrients, then you better be good at absorbing nutrients. You don't want to be bad at absorbing nutrients when there isn't that many nutrients to go around to begin with. You want to be good at it. So cyanobacteria are good at it, so they live there. Why are they good at it? Because they are small. They're tiny. Smaller things have more surface area, and if you have more surface area, then you're better at exchanging chemicals and absorbing nutrients. Big things have less surface area, and they are worse at exchanging chemicals and absorbing nutrients. All right? So I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before, but smaller things, contrarily, have more surface area. Right? So like surface area, right? Well, we usually like to say surface area to volume ratio, right? How much space you take up versus how much surface is around you, right? And smaller things have more surface area and less volume, right? One way to think about it is, why do girls get colder faster than guys do, right? They lose heat faster. They got more surface area to lose heat, less volume to hold it in, right? Those are some of the reasons. Okay, so small things have more surface area, and they like to live in oligotrophic areas because they are good at it, right? They are good at absorbing the nutrients there. Over here, where there's a lot of nutrients, there's probably bigger things that are not quite as good, because you don't have to be good at absorbing nutrients when there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of nutrients. Cyanobacteria evolved pretty early on, 3.5 billion years ago. That is super early. The Earth came about, like solidified 4.5 billion years ago. So about 1 billion years after the Earth formed, we have life, and some of that life learned how to do photosynthesis. Cyanobacteria has been putting oxygen in our atmospheres since 3.5 billion years ago. That's a long time, right? So what do you guys say? Do you guys say that, like, when do you think trees started coming about to produce oxygen? Right? Can we get some estimates of how old the oldest trees are? Well, do you think it's close to this? Or do you think it's much younger than that? What do you guys think?
Younger?
By how much? A lot or a little? Came about roughly the same time or came about way later? Any guesses is okay.
Like 2 billion years ago?
2 billion years. Hey, that's a good guess. That's about half, right? That's about half of that. Okay, so like we got cyanobacteria doing their thing for 1.5 billion years, and then we got some trees coming about.
Roughly at the same time.
Roughly at the same time. Okay, that's another possible guess, right? We got bacteria coming out, and then trees coming about pretty shortly after, right? Well, here's the thing: trees are huge, and they're vastly more complicated than bacteria are. They came a lot later, right? Complicated things came later. How late? Well, trees didn't really start to come until the Carboniferous period, 360 million years ago. That sounds like a lot, but that's nothing compared to this, right? This is 0.36 billion compared to 3.5 billion. So that's like, cyanobacteria have like a 3.2 billion year edge, right? So compared to trees, cyanobacteria have been doing photosynthesis this whole time. They've been like the OG photosynthesizers, right? They've always been doing that. You guys see that? They've been doing it for all those years, and trees didn't crop up until now, right? Until 360 million years ago. And there's some trees before that, but this is when the trees really start to dominate the land, right? Carboniferous period. That is way before the dinosaurs, right? The dinosaurs came about roughly like 250 million years ago during the Triassic period. Right? If you guys maybe heard of that one before, Triassic, Cretaceous, right? So this is way before dinosaurs, so you can imagine dinosaurs came way later than that, for sure. Right? Cyanobacteria are super old, and they've been pumping oxygen into our atmospheres for a long time. It's not as efficiently as trees. Trees are big. Okay? What do? They like to form these rocky structures, okay? These big rocky structures on the beaches of some tropical areas. These are called stromatolites, and they are hard, they're rocky, right? They're made of calcium carbonate. I'm going to introduce this chemical right now, CaCO3. It's a really important chemical in the ocean because so many different organisms depend on this to make their shells. They make their shells out of calcium carbonate, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to end up going through this whole class, and we are going to come up with a list of organisms that are made of calcium carbonate, right? So this is our first one. Cyanobacteria make stromatolites that are made out of calcium carbonate. If you want to describe something that's made out of calcium carbonate, we would use the adjective calcareous, right? A calcareous object is made out of calcium carbonate. If you want to describe the organism that makes the shell, then we use the verb calcify, right? So calcify the organisms, calcify the calcifying organisms, make something calcareous, right? A calcareous shell. Stromatolite is calcareous, which means it is made out of calcium carbonate, right? So a bunch of new words, but they all have to do with this. Is anybody familiar with this chemical? I mean, know anything else that's made out of calcium carbonate?
Under the piers, doesn't it have?
Okay, under the piers, it has barnacles and mussels. And yes, you are right. Those things are made out of calcium carbonate. I feel like you guessed.
No, because I was at the beach.
No, but did you know that it was calcium carbonate?
Well, yeah, because it has the rough structure like that.
Ah, I see. But calcium carbonate is not always rough. Sometimes it is smooth. But you know, you're on the right track. Seashells, like those mussels and barnacles, are made out of calcium carbonate. So, if you guys have felt a seashell before, you guys know what calcium carbonate feels like. Hard, like a rock, right? It's basically a rock. I mean, it might be spiral shaped if it's a snail, but it's a rock,
It's a rock.
right? So, hard, heavy, that's what calcium carbonate is. The hard water deposits near your sink, the green lime,
Right.
that's calcium carbonate, right? And there's a type of rock called calcite that's made of calcium carbonate, right? There's a lot of things made out of calcium carbonate, and we will learn all about them through this, right? So this is the first one, stromatolites, made of calcium carbonate. If you guys felt around the stromatolite to parts where this bacteria are living, you would feel a layer of slime, right? Slimy layer. It's called a biofilm. Film being a thin layered, glossy layer, right? Biofilm. That's a colony of bacteria, right? A colony of bacteria manifests itself in the macro scale like slime, right? So if you guys have some meat in the refrigerator, it's been there for a little bit too long, slimy. What is it? Bacteria, right? Yeah, if you're at the end of the day, you're ready to brush your teeth are slimy. It's bacteria, right? You brush it off when you brush off the layer of biofilm, right? Okay, so anyways, you know, you might find some slimy layers under these things. That's where all the cyanobacteria are living. Okay, so I don't want to go too crazy about cyanobacteria. This is literally all I want you guys to know, right? Blue-green algae made out of, you know, that have chlorophyll and phycocyanate inside of it to make it blue and green. They came about 3.5 billion years ago, way back when, and they make calcareous stromatolites, right? Those are probably the most important things about cyanobacteria. Okay, any questions about this? We all good? Now you know what a cyanobacteria is. What does cyan mean again? Blue green. Yeah. All right. So let's move on and talk about the other primary producer, macroalgae. Right? Okay. So here we have 3 different types of macroalgae. That one, this one, and this one. How do you think we classify macroalgae?
Green leafy.
Okay, so you're using a color and you're also using a texture, right? Good. Yeah, that is a very good way to classify them. You're right on at least one of those. Color. Yeah. See, here's the thing. Humans, right? Humans love to use their eyesight because, like it or not, based off our evolution, our eyesight is our best sense. So, out of convenience, we usually use something called the morphological species concept, which means you like to tell things apart by how it looks. All right. So in this case, we tell algae apart by its color. On the left, we have green algae. In the middle, we have brown algae, and on the right, we have red algae. Exactly. All right. So this is the common name, but no, we're not interested in common names in this class, right? We're interested in more scientific stuff, right? So let's get into that. Let's talk about the green one first, right? The green algae. This is sea lettuce. You go to the beach, there's a lot of sea lettuce lying around, and you go to a pond, and you might find this pond scum floating at the top, which maybe not as pretty, but hey, look, it's still green, so they're related, right? Okay. Green algae, right? How do you think it became green? What pigment do you think it has? Which pigment? What was the name of that molecule? Chlorophyll, yeah. Probably has some chlorophyll in it. In fact, their phylum, do you guys remember phylum?
Yeah.
It's a classification level, is Chlorophyta. Chlorophyta, green plant. Phyte means plant, okay? Now, if you're confused of what phylum is, don't worry. Let's talk about what phylum is, right? Phylum is a type of taxonomic level, right? Every organism can be classified on all these taxonomic levels. Alright, here's a fox. A fox has a classification at every single one of these taxonomic levels. You see phylums right over here. Phylum Chordata. Oh, we've seen that one before, right? Almost all the things that we talked about the first day was a chordata, right? Well, phylum. Phylum is the third highest taxonomic level. The higher up you go, the more inclusive it is. That's why the bar is so long and there's less conditions. The further down you go, the more conditions there are. There's a lot of conditions in order to be this organism, and therefore it becomes very exclusive. Not that many organisms are inside here. Okay? So for example, right here, domain. Let's talk about kingdom. That makes more sense. Kingdom Animalia. How much information do you get when I tell you this organism is in Kingdom Animalia?
It's a king. Is
Let's.
it the high levels of?
No, hold on. What information do we get out of the fact that, you ask me, what kingdom is this organism in? I'm like, oh, it's in Kingdom Animalia. And you're like, oh, well, that doesn't tell me much. I know it's an animal, but it could be a snake, it could be a bird, it could be an ant. What is it, right? You don't know. You don't know that much information about it because these levels are very inclusive and they don't have that many conditions. You just have to be an animal and you're automatically in this kingdom, right? In contrast, what does it take to be here? Well, you'd have to be this, a eukaryote. You'd have to be an animal. You'd have to have a backbone. You'd have to be a mammal. You'd have to be a carnivore. You'd have to be a dog. And you'd have to be a fox. And in this case, you'd have to be this specific fox right here, right? See, all those conditions imposed makes these levels super exclusive and only a few things can be inside of them. In fact, at the very bottom, the species level, there is only one organism in that level. Because that's why we use the word specific, right? Specific refers to just that one and none other ones. Be specific because I only want that one answer.
That's
Right.
the red fox.
The red fox, exactly, is this one right here. No other fox is in here, no other organism is in there, just that one, the red fox is in there, right? It's very specific, it follows all these conditions, right? So we're gonna talk about phylum. Phylum is pretty inclusive for being so high up, but it also at least tells us a little bit about it, all right? Enough so that we could say, well, if you're in the same phylum, then you're probably related in some way. If you're in a different phylum, you're not as related, right? Every organism has this taxonomic classification. So let's look at some familiar sea creatures. Great white shark. Look at this. It's an animal, go figure, right? It's in chordata, right? Which we've seen a couple times. Right, let's look at a different one. Striped shore crab, my favorite species of crab, right? It's an animal, not surprising, right? But look, its phylum is different. Arthropoda, it's not quite as related to the shark, right? They're both animals, but by the phylum level, they're already different, right? Okay, let's go back to what we were just talking about. Sea lettuce, right? Whoa, look at that. It's not even an animal. It's a plant, right? You see that, right? You can use these taxonomic levels, tells you a lot of information about them. And we are talking, in this case, phylum Chlorophyta, right? Chlorophyta, the green algae. Chlorophyta, green algae, has chlorophyll pigments, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. There's other types of chlorophyll too, like C, right? But those are found in other organisms like phytoplankton. When I put pictures of organisms up here, I might put a little caption right here. I'll either put its common name or I'll put this, ova. That is its genus. Wow, we just talked about genus a little while ago. Now we know what genus is. It is the second lowest taxonomic level. It tells you a lot about that organism, but not exactly which species it is, right? If you're ever wondering, what is the scientific name of an organism? That is just the genus and species. The sea lettuce that you guys see here is Ova lactuca, right? The scientific name of this crab, Pachygrapsis crassipus. See right there. Okay, right over here. Gray white shark. Carcharodon carcharias. That is his scientific name. So with that logic, what is our genus? What is our genus? What was that?
Human.
Not human. That's a common name. It's
Homo
it's
sapien.
Homo.
Homo
right?
sapien.
Oh, that's our scientific name, right? But remember,
Homo.
genus is the first part. Homo is the genus, and our species is sapiens. Okay. So, anyways, continuing on, right? We got green algae here. It has chlorophyll inside of it, and let's talk about some examples. We got one already. Sea lettuce. Here's another one. Look at this. Oh, that looks a lot different from sea lettuce, right? Normal algae is flexible, billowy, flowing, right? But look at this algae. Stiff, hard, like a cactus, yeah. Well, it's green, so it's got to be a green algae, but the difference is its texture. How does it become so stiff and hard? Because this type of algae infuses a certain chemical inside of its leaves. What chemical? What chemical does it put inside? Oh, okay, they all put glucose in there, but look at the clues.
It has no pigment in it. I can see that.
No, it does have pigment.
Calcium?
It puts calcium carbonate in there. How do you know? Because it's
Calcareous?
calcareous. Calcareous
that's right.
means that it is made out of calcium carbonate. It has to be calcium carbonate because your bones are made of calcium, but those are not calcareous. Right? Your bones are calcium phosphate. Right? Okay, so calcareous green algae, right? So turns out sea plants sometimes put calcium carbonate inside of their bodies. It's interesting, right? Land plants don't do this. Land plants might put wood in their bodies, right? They might put some other things, but they do not put rocks in their bodies, right? Calcium carbonate. Okay, so that's really interesting. All right, so now we have, look at that. We have two things that are calcareous now. What was the first one again? What's the first one? What was the first thing we talked about today? That was calcareous.
Stromatolites.
Okay, yeah, pretty close. Stromatolites, which are created by cyanobacteria, right? Those things are calcareous. Well, so are these algae, right? Halimeda. Halimeda is a type of green algae that is also calcareous. So there you go. Now we have two things. Make sure you guys get those down. Right? Two things that are calcareous. Right? Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Right? Oh, I guess I should mention this real quick. Anything that's made of calcium carbonate is rocky. All right? And if it's rocky, then you can help build a reef. We are going to learn later that a reef is just a rocky structure. So considering the fact that calcium carbonate is rocky, anything that has that rocky stuff inside can make a reef, right? They can help build the reef. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Forgot about that slide. But yeah, anyways, let's continue. Brown algae, right? Brown algae is in the phylum Phaeophyta. That one's probably the hardest one to remember. Phaeophyta. And what do we have here? The most ubiquitous algae on the west coast. Anyone know what this is called? What type of algae is that? I mean, they're all seaweed, right? They're all macroalgae, but in particular, this is kelp. Yeah, kelp from SpongeBob, right? Kelp. This is kelp, right? This is actual kelp. It is the most ubiquitous algae alongside the west coast. You go to the beach, you'll find this. I know it looks green in this picture, but if you find it washed up on the shore, it'll be brown, right? It only looks green here because it's under some water that's blue, right? But anyways, these guys, brown algae, this is bladderwrack, this is kelp, and they are brown because of the pigment fucoxanthin, right? Fucoxanthin makes them brown. Other than that, I don't think you guys should worry too much about this phylum. Just know that this phylum exists, and fucoxanthin turns them brown, right? All right, how are y'all doing? Doing all right? Okay. So let's move on to the last one. The last one, what color was the last one again?
Red.
It was red, okay? Red algae. Red algae, phylum Rhodophyta. Rhodophyta is red algae, and its pigment probably comes from, well, do we know? Do we know the pigment molecule? Phycoerythrin, remember? Phycoerythrin makes you red. Well, guess what? It has also some amount of phycocyanin in it. What does this make you? Blue. So you got some red, you got some blue. Does it make sense that you become a little bit purplish?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, yeah, so a little bit purplish, right? Mostly red, but a little bit purplish. Combined, these two types of chemicals are called phycobilins, right? Phycobilin is a type of protein. I guess it's a pigment protein. And it could be, you know, you could have different types of phycobilins. You could have phycocyanin, you could have phycoerythrin. Those are different types of phycobilin. And they make you red, right? Now that's really interesting. Why would some type of algae prefer to be green and others would prefer to be red, right? Well, all of these are plants and they're trying to absorb sunlight to do photosynthesis. But if they're different colors, then it makes sense that they absorb different colors then, right? Because this is how light works. If you're a certain color, then you do not absorb that color, you reflect that color, right? I'll explain what that means in a second, right? Let's compare the green and the red algae first, right? If you shine white light, okay, white light has every color in it at these things. Shine white light at the green algae over here, what will it do? It will absorb every single color except for green itself. Isn't that weird? It's green, but it does not absorb green. It's green, so it reflects green. It reflects green into your eye. That's why you see the green. You guys get it? Look at Michelle's shirt. What color is it reflecting? Blue into your eyes. Does it absorb blue? No, it does not. Reflects it, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So, someone who's wearing white, right? White is all of the colors. It reflects all the colors. That's why you can stay cool if you wear white.
Right.
How about someone wearing black? Black has no color. It absorbs all the colors, so you don't see anything. It doesn't reflect any colors. It absorbs it all, so that's why you get hotter in the sun, right? So, look at this. This is a green plant. It reflects green and absorbs all the other colors. Why does it choose to absorb all the other colors but get rid of green? What does it tell you? Do you think green is useful if it's not absorbing it? No, green is useless, right? Or not useless, but it's just not very useful. Turns out, look at this chart. The rate of photosynthesis depending on what color you shine on the plant. What color seems to be the worst? Green. Green is the worst color for photosynthesis, is the least efficient. If you have a plant and you only give it green light, it might starve, right? It might not be able to do enough photosynthesis to stay alive. Plants prefer red and violet light. So if they want to absorb red and violet light, then they should be green. Because if you are green, you will reflect green and absorb these. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you are some color, you will reflect the other colors, right? If you want to absorb some colors, you will reflect the opposite colors, right? That's basically how it goes. Okay? So if you're green, you will absorb all the non-green colors, red, violet, but you will reflect green. Okay? So keep that into consideration. Green is bad for photosynthesis. But what do we notice amongst almost all land plants? They're green. Why? Because they all realize that green is not good for photosynthesis. All land plants have evolved to recognize this, right? They all know that, well, if my leaves are not green, then I'm not gonna get the best colors for photosynthesis. So let's just make green leaves, right? All plants know this. They all make green leaves. All plants on land get optimal white sunlight, right? The only way to get optimal white sunlight if you live in the ocean is if you are shallow at the very surface. Shallow at the very surface still gets almost the same amount of sun as land. So if that's the case, then you can pretend to be a land plant and be green because you're absorbing the same colors, right? So what does it tell you? Green algae, chlorophyta, prefers to live in shallow water, all right? Like a land plant, right? Because in shallow water, it receives normal sunlight for the most part, right? You have almost all the colors available to you under shallow water. I'm implying that when you go to deep water, you do not have all the normal colors. Right, we'll get into that in a second. Okay, but when you're in shallow water, you do not have, you have all the normal colors. So let's look at this video that I made, right? It was in Hawaii. The water was only 10 feet deep. I swam to the bottom and I picked up a crab. It was called a 7-Eleven crab. And let's look at it real quick. A 7-Eleven crab is right over here. You guys see it? It's running on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to see up here, but if you guys look at it, the true color over here, this computer, you can see the color of the dots
Oh, yeah.
are red,
Oh, right.
okay? So what does it tell you? The color red is visible at shallow depths. So if you live in shallow water, being a green algae, you can still absorb that red. You want to absorb red and violet, remember that? Okay, you can still absorb that red. Okay, so there we have it. Green algae prefers to live in shallow water. So what about the red algae, right? Let's go forward and talk about the red algae. If you shine white light on the red algae, what will it absorb and what will it reflect?
Everything but red. Everything but red.
It will absorb everything except for red. It will reflect the red, doesn't want the red. Ooh, isn't that weird? It's kicking off the most valuable color?
Yeah.
Oh, weird. Okay, it will reflect the red, but it will absorb the other things. Blue, green, right? It'll absorb the worst colors, right? Why is it settling for something worse? Well, here's the thing. Organisms, a lot of organisms are just, they live in harsh environments and they're just happy with whatever they can get. Sometimes they don't have the good light available to them and they just have to deal with it, right? So they deal with it by taking whatever they can get, okay? Let me show you something that happens in the ocean, right? The ocean, well, what color is the ocean? Blue, exactly. Why is the ocean blue? Because it turns out in water, the color red disappears very rapidly, and so the ocean looks blue. But is water actually blue? No, it's clear. You guys know that? Water is clear, but it looks blue because when you shine light through it, all the red disappears and only the blue comes out. Okay? Well, here's the thing. If you are red, like this red algae, you reflect red, but you are good at absorbing blue. Sometimes when you're in the ocean, there's only blue light available to you. Does it make sense that you want to be good at absorbing blue now?
Yeah.
How do you be good at absorbing blue? By being red. By being red, you are good at absorbing blue. And blue light is the only color available to you. So there you have it. Red algae is trying to take advantage of the blue light available in the ocean. Right? Let's look at this video that I got. Right? Here's another video that I shot in Hawaii. It's a sea turtle, right? When you do underwater photography, you want to equip your camera with something called a red filter. Like a little film or a lens that you place on top of your lens that's red. If you get a video with that red filter, everything will look pink. Right? That's kind of ugly. But if you take it underwater, everything will look normal. Why is that? Because the red disappears in the water, but that red filter adds it back in.
Oh.
Okay? It adds the red back in, and now it looks like normal colors again. right? So let's look at this. I did something called a red filter test. I'm gonna have to look for it on YouTube. I did a little red filter test in which I took the filter off, and let's see what happens, right? Normal Bay red filter. Oh, wait, is it? Normal Bay red filter. Okay. Here we are. All right. Let's look at this. Look at that. Isn't that colorful?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's colorful, right? Okay, let's look at this part right over here. See that turtle? Let's look at all those colors, right? You see all these colors here? Well, I'm about to take off the red filter. Oh dang, what just happened?
It's all blue now.
Everything's blue, even the sand is blue. Is sand blue?
No.
No, sand is white. But why does it look blue? Because all the red has disappeared. All the other colors have disappeared. The only color left is blue. So if you live deep enough in the ocean, then there's only blue light. So what color should you be if you're an algae? You should be red. Okay? So there you have it. Red algae is adapted to living deep. And I continue on the next slide. Deeper than green algae. Not like super deep, right? It still needs some light. If you live too deep, there's no light. But if you are red, then you can live deeper than green algae does, right? This is not to say that there's no red algae up in the shallows. No, there's plenty of shallow water red algae. But for the most part, deep down in the ocean, you'll find mostly reds, and in the shallow areas, you'll find mostly greens, right? And probably brown, like in between or closer to the deep, because brown can also absorb many different colors. All right, does that make sense? We all got that? Okay, so green algae, it prefers to live in shallow water because green algae still relies on red and violet like a normal land plant. And if you want to rely on those colors, you need normal sunlight. Where can you get normal sunlight in the ocean? At the surface, very shallow. But red algae has given up on normal sunlight, and it has decided to absorb blue because that is the most common color in the ocean, right? The most available color. So by being red, it has adapted itself to living deeper and absorbing blue. Right? So you guys can see, based off its pigments, it can live in different places. Right? That's very cool. Okay, so let's talk about some examples of red algae. Right? So let's look at this. More stiff algae, right? You guys see this? It looks stiff, right? How does algae become stiff again? Calcium carbonate, right? There we go. Now we have a third calcareous organism. This one is called Coraline algae. Coraline algae is a type of red algae, phylum Rhodophyta, and it has calcium carbonate in it, right? This is a really important example. Right? Coraline algae. Right? It's really interesting. It's not like a normal plant. See, look, it encrusts itself on top of this rock, right? It's stiff like this. Okay? You can break pieces off. It's not like a normal plant that's flexible. Right? This is made out of calcium carbonate. Rhodophyta. Okay, Coraline algae. What's another type? Another type might be slightly more familiar. Okay, hold on. There we go. Is this familiar?
Sushi.
Right?
Seaweed.
Sushi seaweed? Yeah, in Japanese, what is this called?
Nori.
Nori, yeah, it's called nori, right? In Chinese, it's called tsai, which means purple vegetable, all right? So it's purple because what they really meant to say was red algae, right? It turns out that this seaweed that we like to eat is red algae. Then why does it look green? Well, those additives, you know, those like artificial colors make it green. But it's actually supposed to be red, right? If we look at some wild nori, right, it looks like this, and that's more convincing as red algae, right? Some wild nori looks like this. Okay, if you guys were to take this seaweed and soak it, it actually turned rubbery again. Makes sense though, because it's just dehydrated seaweed, and seaweed is rubbery to begin with, right? Yeah, I'll probably bring some of this for you guys to try. If you guys like it, I don't know. Okay, and then here's another picture of some nori, right? Okay, it's just covering this rock. People go harvest it, and it's good, you know. Just make sure you wash all the chemicals off of it, right? If there's pollution. Okay, so we got a couple examples of red algae. We have the calophyllus from before that I didn't really talk about. The normal kind. We have Coraline algae and we have nori, right? Nori, the sushi type of seaweed. It's all red algae, right? Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. All three different types of macroalgae. We have green, red, and brown, right? Green, red, and brown. Here are their phyla: Chlorophyta, Rhodophyta, and Phaeophyta. What are their pigments? Chlorophyll. How about for this one? The brown one. What was the pigment for the brown one?
I can't pronounce it.
What does it start with? Fucoxanthin. That is the brown one, okay? And the red one is phycobilins, such as phycoerythrin. Cyanin, erythrin. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah, those are the three different types of algae. Make sure you guys know them. Their pigments, some examples of each of them, why they are the different colors that they are, especially the green and red ones, right? Because they like to live at different depths. Okay. So anyways, all these guys are macroalgae. They are big, right? They are multicellular. You are multicellular, right? You have 1 trillion cells inside your body. So do these guys. They're big. And if they are big, are they good at absorbing nutrients?
Yes.
Why?
Because that's how they got big in the first place.
Okay, that's a good thinking there. Okay. Look, remember, if you want to be good at absorbing nutrients, you have to have a lot of surface area. How do you have a lot of surface area?
Well, then you're bigger.
No, not by being bigger.
No, because you say the smaller thing has
Yes.
more nutrients but less volume.
Has more surface area.
Surface.
Surface area. Yeah, not nutrients. Yes, by being smaller, okay? If you want to be better at absorbing nutrients, you want to have more surface area by being smaller. But these guys are big, so are they good at absorbing nutrients?
No.
No, not quite as good as the cyanobacteria are. So therefore, these guys have to live where there's a lot of nutrients. Okay, they're picky. They gotta live where there's a lot of nutrients. That's one thing. Next, they also have something called a holdfast. They like to root themselves to rocks. Okay, so if they root themselves to rocks, then that implies that they need to have part of their body on the bottom of the ocean. But they can't all be on the bottom, they need sunlight. So the other part of its body needs to be at the surface. Alright? So that implies that this macroalgae can only grow in shallow water. Alright? Because look at this. If you have shallow water, it can hold on to the bottom and make it to the surface at the same time. But if you're at the bottom of the ocean, in order to do that, you'd literally have to be the same height as the depth of the ocean.
Yeah.
You can't do that. It's too long. They can't grow that tall. All right, that's 4,000 meters. So no, they can only live in the shallow areas, right? In fact, if they start growing from here, they don't even have sunlight to start growing with. So how are they going to make it up to here? Let alone to here, right? They cannot live in the deep middle of the ocean. They can only live on the edge, the shallow parts, right? They require a hard substrate, right? What does substrate mean? It's a place to stand on, right? It's a place to exist and lie on. So this ground is our substrate. This rock is its substrate. It needs that hard substrate, and it can only do it if it's in shallow water, right? Not all require that, but most of them do. So for the ones that do, they have to live in shallow water, right? Shallow water that has the hard substrate and a lot of nutrients. Where do we find shallow water that has a lot of nutrients? think about it. Close to
Land?
close to land.
Oh, that's right,
Right.
yeah.
Close to land, there's a lot of nutrients, and close to land, the water is shallower. So these big macroalgae have limited themselves to living close to land, right? It limits their range, and they have to live close to land. See, these areas that have a lot of nutrients and also the shallow water, right? Those fringes along the edge of the continent is called the continental shelf. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It is the part of the ocean that is very shallow and has a lot of nutrients there as well because it's so close to the land. Almost all the life in the ocean, about 90% of the life, is found only on these fringes, the continental shelf. And consequently, when big fishing boats go fishing, they're probably along the continental shelf.
Mhm.
And it's not that hard to fish out the whole ocean because all you do is just fish along the edge. There's not that much here, so don't go there, right? Just go here, fish it all out, right? So
That's true.
yeah, so fishing could get very destructive sometimes, right? All right, so the macroalgae only like to live here where it is shallow and has a lot of nutrients, shallow enough that they can stick their hold fast on the bottom, right? And also enough nutrients, which they need because they're not quite as good at absorbing. So who lives here again? Who lives here again?
Oh,
The small,
Bacteria.
what kind of bacteria?
Oh, it's,
Plankton.
no.
Well, it is a type of plankton. But what was that type of bacteria called?
Is it
They do make the stromatolites.
Cyanobacteria.
Cyanobacteria. There you go. We figured it out. Okay. We got the cyanobacteria. I know you guys. It's almost
They have complicated
ending time,
names.
so it does have complicated names. Yeah. So I understand if you guys are tired. We're almost finished. Right. Okay. So yeah, cyanobacteria like to live here in the oligotrophic areas, whereas the macroalgae like to live at the edges, right, where it's shallow and nutrient rich. Okay? Alright, great. So they can't live in the open ocean because not enough nutrients, right? Plus too deep. So the cyanobacteria live there, right? Because they can float and they can absorb nutrients. Right? Okay, so I think we're pretty much finished. Yeah. So we'll stop here. Starting from the next lecture, we will start to talk about some oceanographic forces that will allow us to explain this blue line. You guys notice this? Let me take away that yellow circle. Maybe you notice that in the whole ocean, it's purple except for this nice straight blue line right over there. And it is much more apparent on the actual computer screen.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so we will start talking about that next time, but for today, this is as far as we'll go. Right? Okay,